He's the internet's boyfriend, the man who gives up his seat on the subway, buys motorcycles for stuntmen, and quietly donates millions to children's hospitals without ever asking for a thank you. Keanu Reeves isn't just a movie star, he's a walking contradiction to the typical Hollywood ego. In a world full of celebrity drama and backstabbing headlines, Keanu somehow floats above it all. And after almost 40 years in an industry that eats people alive, he's still that same humble soul people fall in love with on screen and off. But what if we told you not everyone sees him that way? Because for a man who seems to go out of his way to avoid conflict, who dodges the spotlight when he's not acting, and who rarely says a bad word about anyone, Keanu Reeves has quietly found himself in a handful of surprising, strange, and icy celebrity feuds. Yes, even Keanu Reeves has been crossed, and the tension was so thick it left a mark. Because while the world may see him as untouchable in his kindness, behind the scenes and under the pressure of movie sets and clashing personalities, things haven't always been so peaceful. And you'd be shocked to find out the real truth about Keanu. Keanu's journey to fame. Just saying the name, Keanu Reeves brings a kind of calm. He's been called the nicest guy in Hollywood, and, to many, a real-life hero. But it turns out that even someone as calm and universally loved as Keanu Reeves has had his moments of tension that not many people know about. Some are small, while others are surprisingly personal. But the question is, why exactly is it so rare to hear Keanu's name mixed up in any Hollywood feud? Keanu Charles Reeves was born on September 2, 1964, in Beirut, Lebanon. His father was Hawaiian Chinese, and his mother was English. But after his parents split up, Keanu moved around a lot from Sydney to New York and eventually Toronto, which is where he started to find himself. Keanu wasn't your typical kid. He struggled in school, battled dyslexia, and hopped between 4 different high schools. And while most people automatically assume that Keanu probably never got into trouble, that was definitely not the case. Due to his trouble reading, he wasn't exactly a good student, and this eventually led to him getting expelled from one of his high schools. In an interview, Keanu said, "I was just a little too rambunctious and shot my mouth off once too often. I was not generally the most well-oiled machine in the school." This means that although Keanu looks pretty calm and meek, he definitely has a bit of trouble in him. But despite the challenges with school, there was always something special about him. He had this raw, thoughtful energy, and it was acting that gave him a way out. But his success didn't come easy. His early gigs were quite small. He got booked for some commercials and a few local theater roles. But it didn't take long before that calm, brooding charisma of his caught attention. And when it finally did, then came his breakout moment. In 1989, Keanu charmed audiences when he played the lovable goofball character in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. The film earned positive reviews, with a popular film review website saying Keanu Reeves and Alex Winter are just charming, goofy, and silly enough to make this fluffy time travel adventure work. By the mid-90s, Keanu Reeves was a full-blown star, but what really changed everything for him was The Matrix. In 1999, Keanu became Neo, a role that turned him into a global icon. The entire Matrix franchise was a cultural explosion, and it changed Keanu's life. But even with all that fame, something was still different about him. He didn't act like the typical A-lister. He didn't walk around with the longest entourage or with unnecessary flash. Instead, he reportedly gave away a massive chunk of his Matrix earnings to the behind-the-scenes crew, bought motorcycles for stuntmen, and avoided the Hollywood party scene. Keanu was grounded, and most people noticed. Even among fans and Hollywood insiders, he's seen as quiet, private, and some would even say mysterious. He doesn't do drama, doesn't chase headlines. And although he's been through some real pain and loss, he somehow managed to come out of it all even more compassionate. And over the years, he's built a very solid reputation as a good and decent guy. Let's be honest, Hollywood isn't always the land of humility. But Keanu is in a league of his own. He's kind, soft-spoken, and there's no fake charm or forced smiles. He's just a man doing his job and doing it well, while staying humble at the same time. Even on set, crew members often describe him as respectful, generous, and approachable. And that's one of the many reasons fans adore him. And so, all of this is why it's so rare to hear his name tied to anything negative. Feuds, drama, and enemies just don't sound like Keanu. But the truth remains that Hollywood is pretty complicated, and even the kindest souls can have moments of friction, misunderstandings, and maybe even full-blown fallouts. And even the nicest people, like Keanu Reeves, have had intense moments of tension with some of his colleagues. With many decades in the spotlight and hundreds of collaborators, not every relationship he's had in Hollywood has been smooth sailing. There are some actors who have really hurt Keanu and stepped on his toes, and some names on this list will leave you completely shocked. Keanu Reeves versus Matthew Perry. Now, if there's one feud that really shocked the fans of both actors, it's this one. It didn't happen on set, and it didn't involve a fight over a role. But when Matthew Perry, the beloved Chandler Bing from Friends, mentioned Keanu Reeves in his memoir, jaws dropped. Because out of nowhere, Perry had thrown a very big shade at Keanu, and everyone wanted to know, what exactly did Keanu Reeves ever do to Matthew Perry? It all started in October 2022, when Matthew Perry released his raw and emotional memoir titled Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing. The book was a deep dive into Perry's battle with addiction, his time on Friends, and the personal losses he endured. It was serious, emotional, and a cry for understanding. But buried in the pages, more than once, Keanu Reeves' name popped up, and not in a flattering way. In one of the book's most emotional sections, Perry reflected on the tragic loss of his friend and actor River Phoenix, who died from a substance overdose at just 23 years old. Perry and Phoenix had bonded while filming A Night in the Life of Jimmy Reardon in 1988, and Perry clearly carried the pain of that loss for decades. But it was how he expressed that pain that raised eyebrows. Here's what Perry wrote in his memoir. River was a beautiful man, inside and out. Too beautiful for this world, it turned out. It always seems to be the really talented guys who go down. Why is it that the original thinkers like River Phoenix and Heath Ledger die, but Keanu Reeves still walks among us? That last sentence hit like a slap. Everyone wanted to know what he meant when he said, Keanu Reeves still walks among us. And so, the backlash was immediate. Social media exploded with confusion and frustration. Fans from all sides, including Keanu's, Perry's, and even neutral readers, couldn't believe it. Because let's be clear, Keanu Reeves had no connection to Matthew Perry's addiction, loss, or grief. He had nothing to do with River Phoenix's death. In fact, Keanu was one of River's closest friends. They starred together in My Own Private Idaho and were practically inseparable during that time. So to see Keanu's name thrown into such a dark and personal moment, almost like a scapegoat, felt so wrong. Especially coming from someone like Perry, who was opening up about his own mistakes and inner demons. Many people took to Twitter and Reddit asking the same question. What did Keanu ever do to Perry? At first, some began speculating that maybe Perry was just using Keanu's name to draw contrast, and that the statement was merely a clumsy metaphor, but it didn't sit right, because Perry didn't do it just once. He actually mentioned Keanu's name a second time. Later in the book, while talking about the death of another friend, comedian Chris Farley, Perry again referenced Keanu in a way that felt like an unnecessary dig. He wrote, "His disease had progressed faster than mine had. Plus, I had a healthy fear of a particular illicit substance. A fear we did not share. I punched a hole through Jennifer Aniston's dressing room wall when I found out. Keanu Reeves walks among us. There it was again. It seemed like there was no context or any reasoning. As a matter of fact, it was just another shot at a man who, by all accounts, had nothing to do with Farley or Perry's grief. It was bizarre. It was unsettling, and fans weren't the only ones who noticed. With the internet buzzing, it didn't take long for Matthew Perry to realize he'd made a major misstep. Shortly after the memoir's release, and amid the growing backlash, Perry issued a public apology. He said, "I'm actually a big fan of Keanu. I just chose a random name. My mistake. I apologize. I should have used my own name instead." While some fans accepted this apology, others were still puzzled about how sincere it sounded. Because if Keanu is someone Perry genuinely admires, why use his name, not once, but twice, in such a demeaning and bitter way? Even if it was meant to be random, why Keanu? Why not any of the dozens of Hollywood stars Perry had no connection to? That's where the speculation kicked in. Now, let's make one thing clear. In true Keanu fashion, he actually never responded to the whole comment and controversy that followed. There was no statement, no quote, not even a sideways glance in an interview. But that silence didn't stop people from wondering if there was some kind of unspoken tension between the two, if something happened behind closed doors. And now that it had become an entire scandal, would Keanu begin avoiding Perry? Some Reddit users pointed out that Keanu and Perry had been in the same Hollywood circles for decades. River Phoenix, the one name that ties them together, was close to both men, although at different points in time. Some even wondered if Perry's actions had been fueled by jealousy. In fact, a few people floated the theory that Perry, who struggled with fame and addiction at the height of Friends, might have looked at someone like Keanu, who quietly managed his own pain without scandal, and felt bitter. Because Keanu lost River Phoenix too, but he didn't spiral publicly or write books about it. He mourned, stayed silent, and kept working. Some fans also speculated that Perry, who nearly lost his life to addiction, might have felt unfairly judged by the public's love for someone like Keanu, who was calm, quiet, and deeply respected. Could that have stirred resentment? But what makes their feud more concerning is the fact that, despite being in the same city, in the same industry, and even sharing a mutual friend in River Phoenix, Keanu and Perry were actually never spotted together. In a place like Hollywood, where even the most random actors end up in the same room eventually, that's actually rare and seems almost intentional. Some fans even began speculating if Perry had maybe auditioned for roles that Keanu got, or maybe he just resented the effortless admiration Keanu receives. But whatever it was, fans concluded that it wasn't about Keanu personally. It felt more like projection, Perry's own pain, thrown unfairly at someone who just happened to still be alive. And that's what hurt people the most, because Keanu isn't just alive. He's a man who's endured his own devastating losses, all while carrying himself with grace. And to say something like, "Keanu Reeves still walks among us," wasn't just a careless line, it stung. And it didn't align with the image fans had of Perry either, who was the guy who made millions laugh every Thursday night. After the apology, the internet slowly calmed down. Perry's memoir still sold well. Keanu never responded, and life moved on. But the incident left a mark, proving that even the calmest individuals still get involved in misunderstandings. But this wasn't the only time someone's had a problem with Keanu. This next person treated him in a way some people would term unfairly. Keanu Reeves versus Francis Ford Coppola. In the early 90s, Francis Ford Coppola, the legendary director behind iconic films like The Godfather and Apocalypse Now, and one of the most influential figures in modern cinema, was gearing up for a massive, ambitious project. He was looking to create a gothic, romantic, terrifying take on a classic tale, Bram Stoker's Dracula. Coppola had built his entire legacy on taking risks and crafting masterpieces. His films weren't just movies, they were always deep, layered, and unforgettable. So when he decided to bring Dracula to the big screen in 1992, people expected something grand, lush, bold, and definitely dramatic. And for the most part, that's exactly what they got. But there was one thing, one piece of casting that didn't quite sit right with critics, some fans, and eventually with Coppola himself, and that was Keanu Reeves. At the time, Keanu Reeves was fresh off his success with Point Break and the likes. He had the charm, the face, and the rising star power that made Hollywood executives drool. But Coppola wasn't looking for flash. He was building an old-world horror film dripping in European drama and intense emotion with heavy accents, Shakespearean gravitas, and big sweeping performances. Still, the studio wanted someone bankable, and they decided on Keanu to be cast as Jonathan Harker, the young solicitor who travels to Dracula's castle and gets caught in a nightmare. Now, did Keanu have the look? Absolutely. But the voice, the delivery, and the British accent? That's where the cracks started to show. When Bram Stoker's Dracula finally hit theaters in 1992, the film itself received decent praise. Critics loved Gary Oldman's creepy Dracula. Winona Ryder's performance as Mina was haunting and beautiful. But unfortunately, Keanu's accent became the butt of the joke. Most people noted that it felt stiff, forced, and very unnatural. Critics said he looked lost in the film, like he was reading off cue cards in another language. But people didn't just notice it. They couldn't stop talking about it. A thread on Reddit read, "Why didn't the director tell Keanu Reeves his acting was bad while filming Dracula and give him better direction or advice? I always wondered, when filming, does the director or anyone not notice the bad acting?" Keanu himself even admitted later that it wasn't his best work. He had tried so hard, and yet he couldn't perfect the accent, which is super honest and humble, but also kind of heartbreaking, because he was clearly aware of how out of place he felt. But the most disturbing words didn't come from the critics or the fans. They came straight from Francis Ford Coppola himself. In a much later interview, Coppola was asked about the film and the casting choices, and he didn't sugarcoat it. He said, "We knew that it was tough for him to affect an English accent. He tried so hard. That was the problem, actually. He wanted to do it perfectly, and in trying to do it perfectly, it came off as stilted. I tried to get him to just relax with it and not do it so fastidiously." Some fans got pretty uncomfortable with this statement, and the speculations began running wild. It almost felt like Coppola had admitted that he never thought Keanu was the right fit for the film, even though he never directed it. And when you consider how much Keanu put into the film, it feels sadder. He reportedly took dialect coaching and tried to immerse himself in the role. But when the criticism began pouring, the efforts felt wasted. To make matters worse, Coppola is generally known for being intense. He wanted realism, commitment, and a level of emotion that sometimes pushed actors beyond their comfort zone. And Keanu, on the other hand, is known for being reserved, private, and not the kind of guy who likes to scream or weep on command in front of dozens of crew members. Insiders said Coppola pushed members of the cast of Dracula hard by demanding dramatic bursts, intense emotional shifts, and theatrical movements that didn't come naturally to them. To insiders, it felt like Coppola was trying to pull something out of Keanu that just wasn't there yet. In fact, at one point, it was even reported that Coppola asked other actors to shout and berate Winona Ryder off-camera to provoke an emotional response from her as a form of method acting trick. Ryder herself eventually claimed that Keanu had refused to be a part of that moment, and that's why they remained good friends. although Coppola eventually clarified that it was a misunderstanding and that he hadn't told anyone to hurl inappropriate words at Ryder. The whole situation gave a glimpse into the kind of pressure-heavy set Coppola was running. The truth remains that such a level of intensity can make the set feel more like boot camp than a creative collaboration. And for someone like Keanu, who thrives in roles where subtlety and stillness speak louder than words, the environment was draining. If it were any other actor, they might have spoken about Coppola negatively, with some shades, a clapback, or even a defensive quote. But of course, Keanu being Keanu gave nothing of the sort. He never insulted Coppola and never blamed the director for anything. Instead, Keanu has always owned the Dracula film as a learning curve, a stumble in a long journey, and something to improve from. Which is probably why fans still defend him, even with that cringeworthy accent burned into cinematic history. They realize it wasn't caused by arrogance or by laziness. Instead, it was a young actor thrown into a role that wasn't right for him, and a director who didn't do much to help him. But what if we told you that his creative friction with Francis Ford Coppola wasn't the only source of tension during Dracula? The behind-the-scenes drama was deeper than anyone expected, and right in the middle of that gothic storm was Gary Oldman, a genius actor. Yes, but also a volatile force during filming. Keanu Reeves versus Gary Oldman. Before he became Commissioner Gordon in The Dark Knight, or won an Oscar for playing Winston Churchill, Gary Oldman was already a titan of dramatic acting. He had a reputation for completely losing himself in roles. We're talking full-blown method actor mode. When he signed on to play Count Dracula, he didn't just want to wear fangs and a cape. Oldman wanted to be Dracula. He wore custom-designed red armor, memorized ancient dialects, and tapped into a kind of animalistic intensity that made people on set super uncomfortable. And that's where the problem began. Because when you're living like a tortured vampire on set, things can get weird real fast. And Mann's behavior began affecting his fellow cast members on set, including Keanu. But his annoying behavior was actually directed at the young and talented Winona Ryder. During the filming of Dracula, Ryder was already a huge star, and she had become close friends with Keanu Reeves. She was the one who actually brought the project to Coppola. She found the script, pitched it, and helped shape the cast. But during filming, she and Oldman reportedly clashed a lot, and not in a subtle way. Ryder later revealed in interviews that working with Oldman on Dracula was too intense and not pleasant. She didn't go into details at first, but she dropped enough hints to suggest that things got ugly on set. According to multiple behind-the-scenes accounts, Gary Oldman stayed in character on and off set. He insisted on interacting with the cast as Dracula, not as Gary. That might sound like a quirky acting choice, but for Winona, it was downright creepy. She revealed in a later interview that before filming, she and Oldman got along. However, it wasn't the same after they began shooting. Her words were, "I don't know why. Maybe it's his way of working, but I felt like there was a danger." There were rumors of verbal clashes, especially during romantic or emotional scenes. Oldman's presence was so commanding and sometimes so overwhelming that it made her shut down emotionally. And here's where Keanu quietly enters the picture. Multiple reports say that Keanu Reeves was deeply protective of Winona during filming. Their friendship wasn't just surface level, they had each other's backs. And so, when Oldman's method acting started to rattle Winona, Keanu reportedly hated it. Of course, he didn't start fights or argue with Oldman, but he made it clear to everyone on that set that he was on Ryder's side, just by being present, calming, and loyal. In fact, in another interview, she confessed, "I have these journals, and I just pulled one out recently. It was from around the time of Dracula." The text, "Angst, angst, 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 thank God for Keanu. Thank God I'm going to see Keanu." The fact that Ryder could find some sort of solace in Keanu was beyond beautiful. And that subtle form of protest that Keanu put up to those who treated Ryder in a weird way is exactly how Keanu handles issues like this. He wasn't going to match Oldman's intensity, but he didn't have to. His quiet demeanor was enough to show that he wasn't comfortable with how things were unfolding. And let's not forget that the film was already a pressure cooker. Between Coppola's aggressive directing style and Oldman's full-throttle Dracula performance, the set was more a war zone than a workplace. Keanu, caught in the middle, had to walk a fine line. But it was clear that his loyalty to Winona Ryder may have created tension with Oldman. But there's more. Because apparently, it wasn't just Winona who had issues with Oldman. According to multiple insiders, Francis Ford Coppola and Gary Oldman also butted heads throughout production. Coppola had his vision for the film, which was elegant, sweeping, and emotional. But Oldman, on the other hand, had his idea of Dracula, which was grotesque, violent, and tortured. One particular argument reportedly broke out during a scene where Coppola wanted Dracula to appear more romantic and more human, and Oldman reportedly refused and insisted that Dracula was not a man, but a monster instead. He made it clear that his character wasn't meant to love, but to feed. The director tried to get him to soften the performance, but Oldman pushed back. Coppola allegedly snapped, and it broke into a whole argument. It got so bad that the two had to take a break from each other for a few days. So there was Oldman versus Winona, Oldman versus Coppola, and Keanu stuck in the middle, trying to stay sane. Well, it's not hard to imagine how this impacted Keanu. He's not a chaos guy. He's calm, respectful, and professional. And here he was, watching his close friend struggle, watching his director clash with his co-star, and possibly being forced to perform scenes that felt emotionally toxic must have made him feel uncomfortable, and perhaps a certain type of way towards Oldman. In more recent years, the drama resurfaced in interviews, but with a twist. Oldman has since admitted he was difficult during that period. He chalked it up to being too wrapped up in his craft and struggling with personal issues. He even said he wished he would have handled things better. Winona, on the other hand, shared something more revealing in 2018. While promoting Destination Wedding with Keanu, she casually mentioned that she and Keanu might have actually gotten married on the set of Dracula, in a real ceremony, officiated by a real priest. She said, "We actually got married in Dracula? No, I swear to God, I think we're married in real life." Then Keanu himself, in another interview, confirmed the news by saying, "We did a whole take of a marriage ceremony with real priests. Winona says we are." Later he added, "Coppola says we are. So I guess we're married in the eyes of God." Fans found it wild, but it reminded them that Keanu and Winona's bond never broke. In fact, when asked if she'd like to join the John Wick movies, she said, "If it involved a lot of stunts, I'm like thinking of my bones. Oh my God, I would literally do anything with him though. He is so special." And maybe, just maybe, some of that bond was forged in the fires of those uncomfortable Dracula days when Gary Oldman's shadow loomed a little too large. It's quite strange that a man as gentle and soft-spoken as Keanu Reeves found himself caught in the crossfire of such intense egos and on-set chaos. But the great thing is that Keanu never lashed out publicly. He just did what he always does and handled it with quiet grace. But the deeper you look, the more you realize that even the calmest souls aren't immune to conflict, especially in Hollywood. But what do you think? Who else might still be holding a grudge against Keanu Reeves? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more interesting videos and untold stories.